Hello. We spend a lot of time on this podcast talking about how to manage the storms, how to patch the sails, and when your nervous system is shredded, how to navigate through the rough waters of burnout and boundaries, even the way we accidentally can sink our own relationships. But today, we're not looking at weather today. We're going to look at the ocean itself because here's the truth about being human. No matter how well you know your ship, no matter how polished your deck is, or how firmly you grip the wheel, most of your life is being directed by what's moving beneath the waterline. Have you ever had a reaction to someone that was so fast, so visceral that it felt like it bypassed your brain entirely? Have you ever had a dream that left you feeling haunted for days, like it was trying to hand you a message in a language that you don't speak? Have you ever looked at a pattern in your life, the people you date, the ways you sabotage yourself, the fears you can't shake, and thought, why do I keep doing this? I know better. If you have, you have brushed up against the unconscious. A little over 100 years ago, a Swiss psychiatrist named Carl Jung decided to map that dark water. While other psychologists were focused on fixing surface level behaviors or digging into childhood memories, Jung went deeper. He believed the human mind wasn't just a logical machine that occasionally broke down. He saw it as a vast, ancient, mythic ecosystem. He gave us the words we still use when we're trying to explain the parts of ourselves that we don't understand: the ego, the shadow, introversion, extroversion, the archetypes. Jung didn't just want to cure people so they could be normal and go back to work. He wanted people to become whole. And he knew that to become whole, you eventually have to stop pretending you're the only captain and realize that you're also in a storm. The sea and the monsters are living in the deep. So today, we're dropping a lantern over the side of the ship. We're going to walk through Jung's map of the psyche, from the mask you wear for the world to the shadow that you hide in the recesses of your mind, to the collective ancient inheritance that we all share. So if you've ever felt like there is more to you than the person who answers to your name, stick with me. It's time to meet the rest of your crew. I am Lee Perry. I am the pirate therapist. Welcome if it's your first listen, and welcome back if it isn't. Now, let's talk about Carl Jung. Jungian theory, developed by Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung, is a school of psychology that focuses on the integration of the conscious and unconscious parts of the mind to achieve personal growth and wholeness. Unlike his contemporary Sigmund Freud, which we've all heard of, who emphasized childhood experiences and repressed sexual drives, Jung believed the human psyche is far more complex and is deeply influenced by a universal ancestral experience. So here's the core pillars of Jungian theory. Jung divided the psyche, the totality of the mind, into three parts. The ego. In Jungian psychology, the ego is essentially the I in your sense of conscious identity. If you think of your entire mind, the psyche, as a vast ocean, the ego is the captain steering a small ship on the surface. Jung described the ego as the center of the field of consciousness. It is the part of you that is aware of existing. It makes decisions and meditates between your internal thoughts and your external world. When you say, I'm hungry, or I believe this is right, that's your ego speaking. Here are some key characteristics of the ego, according to Jung. The command HQ of consciousness. The ego organizes your thoughts, your feelings, your senses, and your intuitions. It is responsible for filtering information from the environment, deciding what is relevant and what to focus on, and taking action to get you what you need or what you want. A strong, well-established ego is necessary because it allows you to function in society. It allows you to set goals, to resist being overwhelmed by unconscious instincts or emotional impulses. Now, the ego versus the self. A major distinction in Jungian theory is the difference between the ego and the self. The ego is only the center of your consciousness, but the self is the center of your entire psyche, which includes both the conscious and the vast unconscious. I believe that we are born with a sense of wholeness, the self, and as we grow through early childhood, the ego slowly breaks off and crystallizes into its own separate identity. Because the ego is just one small part of the psyche, it is entirely dependent on the larger, more powerful self. Jung compared the relationship to the earth and the sun. The ego orbits the much larger self. Now, here's the danger of a rigid ego. While having an ego is essential for survival, Jung warned against letting it become too rigid or inflated, because the ego's job is to select and filter information. It can create a bubble that blocks out anything it deems unwanted or contradictory to its self image. If your ego becomes entirely detached from the unconscious, you lose touch with your authentic nature. This is where Jung's concept of individuation comes in. The goal of life is not to destroy the ego, but to mature it so that it can communicate with and navigate, or rather integrate, the hidden parts of the unconscious mind. In Jungian psychology, the ego is essentially the I of your conscious identity, the collective unconscious. When Jung talked about the collective unconscious, he was pointing to something deeper than your personal memories or your individual wounds. He believed that there's a layer of the psyche shared by all human beings, a kind of inherited psychic ground that sits beneath our personal life stories. So, if the personal unconscious is the cargo hold filled with your forgotten griefs and fears and unfinished stories, the collective unconscious is the ancient sea that all ships are floating on, whether they realize it or not. It is not made up of the details of your childhood, but of universal patterns, instincts, symbolic forms that human beings seem to encounter across cultures and across time. That's why the same kinds of figures keep showing up everywhere: the mother, the hero, the trickster, the wise old guide, the shadow in the woods, the death and rebirth story, the journey into darkness before transformation. Jung called these recurring patterns archetypes, and he saw them appearing in dreams and myths, in religions, in stories, even in art. But there are parts of you that are uniquely yours. Your heartbreaks are yours, your shame is yours, your desires belong to you, and of course, your memories belong to you. But there are also parts of you that are not just yours. There are fears and symbols and inner characters that seem older than your biography, older than your family story, maybe older than your language itself. That dream that you had about being chased, that strange pull towards a wounded hero, that deep, almost immediate recognition you feel when you hear a story about exile or betrayal, of rescue and sacrifice, or eventually, hopefully, coming home. Jung would say these patterns matter because they may arise from a collective unconscious, the shared symbolic inheritance of being human. In other words, sometimes what moves you most deeply is not just something from my week or something from my childhood. Sometimes it's your soul recognizing an old pattern. Now, why does this matter? The idea matters because it means that your inner life is not random. Your dreams, your repeated attractions, your emotional reactions to certain stories and symbols may be connected not only to personal history, but also to these larger human patterns Jung believed we all carry. And for a lot of people, that can feel strangely comforting because it means the darkness that you may meet inside of yourself may not be evidence that you're broken. It may mean that you're participating in something profoundly, genuinely human. You're not the first person to wrestle with the shadow. You're not the first person to long for a transformation. And you are not the first person to feel like there is some kind of ancient drama playing out inside of your very modern life. When Jung talks about the collective unconscious, he's talking about the deep water beneath all of us. It's not just your memories, not your personal pain, but something older, the shared psychic inheritance, full patterns and symbols human beings seem to carry with them everywhere. This is why stories from totally different cultures can hit the same nerve inside of us. In writing and storytelling, the hero's journey is often called a monomyth. It is a classic narrative structure or template popularized by mythologist Joseph Campbell. It describes the common arc of a protagonist who sets out on an adventure, faces transformation or transformative challenges, it achieves a victory, and returns home fundamentally changed. Writers use this framework because it mirrors universal human experiences of growth and struggle and overcoming adversity. The journey is typically divided into three main acts, comprising of 12 distinct steps. And here's the breakdown of that framework. The departure, the separation. This act introduces the hero and the catalyst that forces them to change. The ordinary world. We see the hero in their normal, comfortable life before the story truly begins. This establishes who they are and what their limited worldview is. Then there's a call to adventure. A problem or a challenge, an opportunity arises that disrupts the hero's ordinary world. Step three is the refusal of the call. The hero hesitates or initially rejects the challenge out of fear or insecurity, or maybe just to a desire to stay in their comfort zone. Step four, meeting a mentor, a guide or teacher that appears to offer a hero wisdom or training or magical tools needed for the journey. Step five, crossing the first threshold. The hero commits to the adventure, leaving the ordinary world behind and stepping into the special or unknown world. Now that's Act One. Is this sounding familiar in a lot of the books you've read? It should. Act Two, and this is the longest act. This is where the hero is tested and undergoes deep internal and external transformation. Part 1, tests allies and enemies. The hero navigates the rules of the new world, making friends, facing adversities or adversaries, and overcomes minor hurdles. Step 2, approach the innermost cave. The hero and their allies prepare for the ultimate challenge or confront their deepest fears. Step 3, the ordeal. The climax of the second act. The hero faces their greatest challenge, their enemy, their fear. This often involves a metaphorical death and rebirth, where the old version of the hero dies so a stronger one can emerge. Step 4, the reward. Having survived the ordeal, the hero claims their prize, which could be literal treasure, a weapon, a profound new knowledge, or insight. Act 3, the return. The hero must now bring what they have learned back to where they started. Step 1, the road back. The hero begins the journey home, often facing final, desperate pushback from the remaining antagonistic forces. Step 2, the resurrection. The final, most severe test where the hero must use everything they have learned to survive one last life or death encounter, and this completes their transformation. Step 3, the hero arrives back to their ordinary world, but they have been changed forever. They use their new wisdom to help their community or to heal the world. The hero's journey works well. It works so well because it, according to Jung, taps into that collective unconscious where we can all relate because of this. The story arc in writing works well because of this collective unconscious. So sometimes when a dream unsettles you, or a myth grabs you, or a story feels like it knows you better than your own friends do, maybe it's not just entertainment. Maybe it's something ancient in you recognizing itself. There's something beautiful about that because it means that your struggles are personal, yes, but they're also relatable to other people, which helps us connect. You're living your own story, but you're also living inside of patterns that countless people before you have known in different forms. Now, let's look at the archetypes. In Jungian theory, archetypes are universal psychic patterns that shape the world and how people experience themselves and others in the world. And Jung believed they arise from the collective unconscious rather than from one's personal biography alone. You can think of them as recurring inner characters in story forms that keep appearing in dreams, myths, religions, literatures, and art because they reflect the deep structures of human experience. So, what are archetypes? Archetypes are not fixed personalities or literal people living inside of your mind. I would hope not literally. They are inherited patterns that organize emotion, imagination, and meaning. That is why very different cultures still produce similar figures, such as the mother, the hero, the trickster, the guide, the shadowy enemy, and the figure of transformation or wholeness. So let's look at some examples. The persona is the social mask. That's the part you built for adaptation, reputation, and belonging to the outer world. The shadow refers to the disowned, the feared, and less acceptable parts of the self. In Jungian psychology, the shadow is the part of you that holds qualities, impulses, and feelings and traits that your unconscious identity does not want to claim as me. The shadow is not part of you that is evil. It is the part of you that has been pushed into the dark recesses because it felt unacceptable or dangerous or shameful or incompatible with the person that you have learned to become. What the shadow is there's a version of you that you know how to present, and then there is the material that falls outside of that presentation, which Jung located in the unconscious and especially associated with the shadow. So if your conscious self says, I am kind and calm and generous, the shadow may hold the rage, the envy, the selfishness, the pettiness, the hunger for power that never made it into your approved definition of your self image. But the shadow can hold good things that were rejected early, like confidence, ambition, assertiveness, creativity, joy. If these parts at any point in your history felt unsafe to express, if they were ever shut down or told that that wasn't right, they might fall outside of that definition of socially acceptable. But these are good things. I think we can accept that confidence, assertiveness, creativity, joy. But these are also things that I can think of a lot of examples that get shut down by parents, by friends, by sometimes even teachers. These are the parts that can fall outside of that socially acceptable definition of who we are. So most of us like to imagine that we're pretty straightforward creatures. We think that what I know about myself is probably the whole story. Jung would say, not even close. There are parts of you that got sent to the brig for a long time and a long time ago. And maybe they were inconvenient. Maybe they threatened your sense of belonging. Perhaps somebody taught you directly or indirectly that in order to be loved, you had to be nice and useful and agreeable and competent and unbothered by everything that they don't want you to be bothered by. So everything that doesn't fit in that image of acceptable gets shoved into the dark. It gets pushed back into those dark recesses of your mind. This is where the shadow lives. That doesn't mean that those parts disappeared. It means that they've kept living outside of the light of your consciousness, influencing your reactions and your relationships, your judgments, even your fantasies from the dark recesses of your mind, from behind the curtain, so to speak. This is a fantastic piece of trivia that perfectly bridges pop culture and psychology. There was a very famous radio drama in the 90s called The Shadow, and it's known for its iconic catchphrase, who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows. This is not accidentally related to Jungian psychology. It's very deeply connected to it. The creator of the character, Walter B. Gibson, was directly influenced by Carl Jung's concept of the shadow archetype. Here is how Jungian theory shaped the character and the show. Now, the premise of the show in the radio drama, the protagonist is Lamont Cranston, a wealthy, privileged playboy, which represents the ego or the conscious, socially acceptable persona. However, Cranston harbors a dark secret. He has trained himself to use the dark side of his mind to fight crime. When he fights evil, he becomes his alter ego, the shadow. So here's the Jungian connection. The duality of man. Jung taught that every person has a conscious persona, the face that we show the world, and an unconscious shadow, the dark or hidden, repressed parts of ourselves. Lamont Cranston embodies this perfectly. By day, he is a respectable socialite. By night, he taps into the darker, hidden aspects of the human psyche to become a terrifying force. The show's famous opening line is a direct translation of Jungian theory. Jung believed that the shadow holds our squelched impulses and unacceptable behaviors and the capacity for both great good and terrible evil. The shadow, the character, uses his deep psychological understanding of human darkness to terrify criminals because he knows what they're hiding in their own unconscious mind. Using the shadow as a force for good, a key part of Jungian theory is that the shadow is not inherently evil. It contains vital energy and strength, survival instincts. If you ignore the shadow, it controls you, which is what happens to the criminals in the show. But if you confront and integrate the shadow, as Lamont Cranston does, you can harness its power for good. Cranston uses the terrifying power of the shadow archetype to protect society. It is a brilliant literal dramatization of Jung's warning that we must make the darkness conscious. So how does this show up? One of the clearest ways the shadow shows up is through projection. When qualities we cannot tolerate in ourselves are experienced as especially irritating, threatening, or fascinating in other people. So the person who insists that they're never angry may be surrounded by awful angry people. Or the person who prides themselves on humility may feel an outsized reaction to anyone openly ambitious. Sometimes the shadow shows up in dreams as a frightening stranger, a rival or a monster, or some kind of unsettling figure that feels both foreign and strangely familiar. Jung did not think psychological growth meant becoming pure or flawless. He thought it required becoming more whole, more complete. And what that means is developing a more honest relationship with the shadow rather than pretending that our shadow is not there. Integrating the shadow does not mean acting out every dark impulse, it means recognizing what is inside of you, taking responsibility for it, and reclaiming the energy that's trapped inside of repression and denial. And in that sense, shadow work is less about becoming worse and more about becoming less divided. The shadow is part of you that your daylight self would rather not introduce at parties. It is the anger you swore that you did not have, the neediness you learned to hide, the jealousy that embarrasses you, the vanity that you deny, the grief that feels too heavy, and sometimes even the strength or boldness that you buried because it once made other people uncomfortable. And the strange thing is, the more you firmly insist that that's not me, the more likely it is to become part of your psyche has that's just been shoved into the basement instead of bringing it into the room. So when someone triggers you in a way that feels bigger than what that moment deserves, or when you keep repeating patterns that you cannot explain, or when a dream leaves you disturbed for reasons you can't quite name, I would say that it may be worth asking your shadow if your shadow is trying to be seen. Not so that you can shame yourself, but so that you can become more honest, less divided, and more fully human. Now, let's talk about the anima and the animus. When Jung talks about the anima and the animus, he's talking about inner figures in the psyche that carry qualities that we do not fully recognize or consciously claim in ourselves. Traditionally, he used anima for the unconscious feminine dimension in a man and the animus for the unconscious masculine dimension in a woman. Though the deeper point is that each person contains inner qualities that may feel unfamiliar, mysterious, or split off from our conscious self. Jung also believed that these inner figures showed up through dreams, fantasies, attractions, projections, and strong emotional reactions to other people. So there's a part of you that you know how to introduce, the part with the name, the voice, the role in your community. There's a history, and that part says, "This is who I am." Then there are other parts of you that do not come forward so easily, parts that feel distance, that can be complicated, tender, powerful, wild, soft, decisive, receptive, fierce, relational, calm. Jung would say that some of those are more hidden qualities get carried by these inner figures called the anima and the animus, not as literal little people living inside of your head, but as patterns of energy and meaning that shape how you love and what you're longing for, what you're fearing, and what you go looking for in other people. So sometimes you meet someone and they feel almost enchanting to you, bigger than life, with a charged energy like they hold a key to some kind of locked room inside of you. And maybe part of what's happening is not just that you are seeing them clearly. Maybe part of what is happening is that your own psyche is projecting something onto them that has not yet learned how to own. That's why attraction can feel so mysterious, why admiration can feel almost spiritual at times, why certain people can disturb you or fascinate you or seem to carry some kind of magic. Jung thought that the psyche often uses other people as screens onto which we project unclaimed inner material. So the anima and the animus are not just about romance, they're about inner balance. They're about the parts of you that your conscious identity may not yet know how to welcome. And growth, in Jung's view, involves becoming more aware of those inner opposites so they stop running your life from the shadows and can instead become part of a fuller and more integrated self. To speak plainly, sometimes what you chase outside yourself is actually something your soul is asking you to develop within yourself. The strength that you admire in someone else, the tenderness that undoes you, the clarity, depth, beauty, courage, receptivity, conviction, or emotional fluency that seems to live inside of them. Yeah. Part of that work, according to Jung, may be to ask, where does that live inside of me? We spend so much of life thinking that we are just reacting to other people, when sometimes we're standing in the presence of our own unfinished inner world. Jung's invitation was not to shame that process, but to become aware of it, to become conscious of it. So if someone keeps showing up in your life and stirring something ancient inside of you, or if your dreams keep handing you figures that feel strange and powerful, or if part of you feels split between softness and strength, feelings and logic and surrender and perseverance, maybe the question isn't what's wrong with me. Maybe the question is what part of me is asking to be known. So let's look at the self. In Jungian psychology, the self is not the same thing as the ego. The ego is the center of conscious awareness, while the self is the organizing center and totality of the whole psyche, including both conscious and unconscious life. The self is the larger wholeness within you, the deeper pattern of who you are beyond the small daily I that talks and plans and performs and worries and goes through the daily motions. So the ego is the part of you that says, this is me and this is what I think, this is what I want. But Jung believed that the conscious identity is only one part of the psyche and not the true total center. The self, by contrast, includes the ego but is larger than the ego because it holds together the full personality, including the parts of you that you know and the parts of you that you don't know yet. Most of us live as though the voice in our head is the whole ship. Jung would say that that voice matters, but it is only the captain on the deck, while the self is more like the entire vessel, the sea beneath it, and the deeper compass trying to orient the voyage towards wholeness or completeness. So, why does this matter? For Jung, psychological growth is not about inflating the ego or becoming more polished. It's about the ego entering a better relationship with the self so a person can become less divided and more whole. And that is why the self is tied to individuation. The long process of integrating hidden or split off, splintered, if you will, or unconscious material. So your life is not run only by the narrow part of you that happens to be conscious right now. Jungian archetypes often show up symbolically rather than literally, which is why a dream figure or a recurring type of romantic attraction or mythic story can feel strangely familiar and emotionally charged. In writing, they help explain why audiences instantly recognize patterns like a wounded hero, or the wise mentor, or a descent into darkness, or perhaps the trickster who disrupts order. For Jung, archetypes matter because they suggest your inner life is not random. Your conflicts and longings may connect to a larger human patterns as well as personal history. That also means that growth is not just about managing symptoms, but about becoming conscious of which archetypal forces are shaping your life and how they might be integrated more wisely. Archetypes are the old roles that the soul already knows, the patterns that keep returning whenever human beings try to make meaning out of love, out of fear, power, loss, and transformation. They're why some stories do more than entertain us. They feel like they remember us. Now let's look at individuation. The ultimate goal of Jungian psychology is individuation. This is the lifelong process of psychological growth where a person integrates the conscious and unconscious parts of their mind. By exploring dreams and confronting the shadow and balancing opposing internal forces, an individual strives to reach their fullest potential and achieve a cohesive sense of self. Jung also introduced the theory of psychological types in 1921, proposing that people experience the world using four primary psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. He paired these with two main orientations, introversion and extroversion. This framework later became the foundation for the famous Myers Briggs personality test. In Jung's theory, personality types are his way of describing the different patterns by which people orient themselves to the world and process experience. He paired two broad orientations, introversion and extroversion, with four main psychological functions: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Jung's model started with the idea that people differ in where their psychic energy tends to flow. Inwards towards the inner world, he called introversion, or outward towards the external world, which he called extroversion. On top of that, he proposed four main functions people use to engage in life: thinking, feeling, sensation, and intuition. Thinking and feeling describe two ways of evaluating experience, while sensation and intuition describe two ways of perceiving it. In simple terms, sensation is concerned with what is concrete and directly present. Intuition is oriented toward patterns and possibilities. Thinking leads towards analysis, and feeling leans towards value and meaning. Jung did not present personality types as a shallow label system so much as a way of describing habitual psychological style. His theory suggests that people naturally rely more heavily on some functions than others, which helps explain why two people can face the same situation and respond in very different ways. This framework, the one that later becomes used as a basis for the Myers Briggs type indicator, which adapted Jung's ideas into a widely known personality system. Eventually, if people disagree about later type systems, Jung's original contribution was influential because it offered a structured way to think about differences in attention, judgment, and inner orientation. Jung believed that people are not all steering by the same inner compass. Some of us move through life by analysis, some by values, some by what is tangible, and some by what is possible. We also differ in whether we naturally turn towards the outer world or towards the inner one. We've covered a lot of open water today. So if you're interested in learning more about Carl Jung and his way of thinking, look him up. He is a fascinating study. If you'd like to just be entertained, there was a movie about the shadow in the 90s, had Alec Baldwin, I believe. That was a fun movie. Perhaps give it a watch now that you know more about where that whole concept came from. Now, we started on the upper deck with the ego, the captain, the I, the part of you that answers emails, makes plans, and does the daily to do list and tries to keep the ship sailing straight. We looked at persona, the flags that you fly and the uniform you wear so the rest of the fleet knows how to treat you. It's necessary, but it's just a mask. It's not the entire story. And then when we went below decks and we looked in the shadows, we found the shadow, the cargo hold where you shoved every piece of anger, grief, wildness, and inappropriate joy that didn't fit into your uniform, the parts of you that laugh at inappropriate jokes, the parts of you that aren't evil, just exiled. We touched on the anima and the animus, the mysterious inner opposites that shape who we fall for, what we project, and what our soul is asking for us to finally own inside of ourselves. And beneath it all, we felt the pull of the collective unconscious, the ancient shared sea of myth and archetype that reminds us of our deepest struggles. They're not just personal, they're profoundly human. Jung didn't map this out so we could fix ourselves into perfect, shiny people. He mapped it so we could become whole, so we could stop pretending that we're the only captain and start learning how to sit at the table with the rest of the parts of ourselves, our own personal crew, even the ones that we've kept locked away in the dark. Now, because a ship that only trusts the daylight is never going to survive the storm, the captain who knows their own depths, that's someone who can sail anywhere. So if today's voyage stirred up any questions, or if you want to dig deeper into how to actually talk to your shadow instead of just running from it, keep tuning in. We'll talk about these things. Follow this podcast. We would enjoy a follow. That's the royal we. I would enjoy it if you would follow. Ask questions. I like it when people ask questions or make comments. I encourage that. So until next time, keep an eye on your crew, inside and out, and don't be afraid of the dark water. I wish you all fair winds and sunny skies. I am your host and captain of this vessel, Lee Perry, the pirate therapist. So take care of yourself and maybe consider letting your shadow out to play once in a while. Take care.